Hello, hello. It is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop, and today we're going to be talking about EQing speakers. But more specifically, not just any old way to EQ speakers. There are much more accessible ways to EQ speakers today. But there is a better and worse way to EQ speakers. At least there's an optimal way to EQ speakers. And that's what today's guest is here to talk about with us. We have Nate Baglios from Cali Audio. As you guys know, they make some of my favorite speakers, and they are one of the sponsors of MixCon, which is one of the reasons we get to put on MixCon free to the public. Before we get into all this stuff about EQing speakers and even better ways to do it, if you're willing to use a little bit of your brains and the tiniest bit of elbow grease, I want to give a shout out to the presentation that they help sponsor. If you haven't checked out Nico Bolas's MixCon Masterclass, please do. He's an amazing producer, engineer, mixer. And I got to tell you, there was a bunch of people who wrote in saying it was like one of the most touching MixCon Masterclasses they've been to. Nico just like changes your brain when you listen to him and makes you focus on trusting yourself and really getting back in touch with the artistry of music production. And I really can't recommend this one enough. So thanks so much to Cali Audio for being sponsors of MixCon, helping us produce the masterclass with Nico. It's wonderful. Check it out. Also, we are giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear, including Cali Audio speakers, in the MixCon Mega Giveaway. So check that out. Go over to mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com, where you can sign up an RSVP for more MixCon masterclasses and sign up for that giveaway. We got 3 chances to win more than $10,000 worth of free gear. All right, with all that out of the way, I want to introduce our guest and start asking them questions. Nate, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good to be with you as always. Big question I have for you is EQing speakers and rooms to make them sound better used to be something that was only done in the fanciest studios in the world. And honestly, back in the day, sometimes it hurt more than helped. But there has been a lot of advancements in technology that have made this A, better in the high-end studios, and B, more accessible for home studios. And there's a lot of these off-the-shelf solutions, which I think are great and really easy to learn and inexpensive, things like SonarWorks and the IK Multimedia Arc and all that. But you and your new higher-end series of Cali Audio monitors have built EQ correction right into the speakers, and you have what you think is a better approach to EQing speakers. Can you tell us why you went with this type of EQ correction and what you think makes your approach to EQ correction more optimal than maybe some of the other off-the-shelf alternatives that some people may be familiar with?
Yeah, so this approach comes from decades of trying to get trying to get speakers to sound right in whatever room that they're placed in. And so you probably know a lot of the Cali team has history working for JBL, which involves not only the studio world, but also the cinema world, also live sound, where this idea of you're going to put a certain speaker into any room in the planet. How do you get it to sound the way that it's supposed to sound? How do you've engineered a speaker to sound neutral and to sound good. How do you make sure that once it gets into the room where it's actually going, it sounds good? And so there's measurement processes that have been developed over the course of, literally decades, some of which are better than others. But ultimately, when it comes down to you as one person need to measure a system, certain members of our team were doing measurements using a 6-microphone array. And thinking that would do a pretty good job at capturing both the direct sound from the loudspeakers as well as reflected sound from the first reflections, as well as total sound power in the room. So 2 pointed at each speaker, 2 a little further back, pointed at the first reflections, 2 a little further into the room. And that gave a pretty good overall picture of what it was sounding like. The issue was if you moved one of those microphones like an inch, you would get a completely different result. And so which result is correct? What are you actually going to correct to? So that becomes a problem. So Charles Sprinkle on our team, based on that, and based on some conversations he had with an engineer named Paul Peace, who was tuning cinema systems, started to develop a moving microphone average. And so the idea here is that you move the microphone through a volume of space, roughly representing the listening position. In a studio, that's going to be about the size of the head of the person who's doing the production or the mixing. But in a cinema space, that would be like an entire row of chairs. By moving the microphone around, you basically get a large number of microphone positions. So the other way to do this would be to take in several hundred microphones and place them all in different positions in the room, or do a sweep measurement at each of these different positions, by moving the microphone, you get data that's just as valid, and you get it way faster, and it's highly repeatable.
Yeah.
So that's the method that we sort of have built what we're advocating based on. And once you get, and you're probably going to speak to this, once you get past a learning curve of how do I take a moving microphone average, what you get is a reliable measurement. I can do the measurement, you can do the measurement, we can each do the measurement 3 weeks later. We're going to get the same result if we're measuring the same speaker in the same place. Excuse me, I'm a little under the weather. It's very fast. So once you know how to do this, that measurement takes about 30 seconds per speaker if we're measuring a space for a studio, because we're going to take 3 measurements per second, getting a total of 100 measurements. So that's about 33 seconds that takes to do the measurement. And it's reliable. So we've correlated that data, and Charles has a white paper, and we'll make sure we put a link somewhere in the description here, correlating that data to taking 256 fixed microphone positions, and then also correlating that to the experience of producers in those rooms, saying, okay, this is what we measured. You've got a little bit of a lump in your top end. You've got some things going on your bottom end. Is that what you're hearing? Yes, that's absolutely what I'm hearing.
Cool.
So we know.
So let me see if I can recap a little bit of this just for those who might have lost the plot here. You're telling me that you were actually able to simplify the process dramatically from where it started to get results that are as good or potentially better because they're more reliable than placing a ton of mics. So one of the solutions here is to place a ton of mics in the room. This could theoretically give you accurate measurements if everything was placed exactly correctly and didn't move. That is a lot more work for potentially less reliable results because there's maybe more room for user error. I did this process, and I'll show you guys some of the EQ charts. I measured some speakers. Nate was nice enough to send me some callies to actually do these measurements on. And I've got to say, it was remarkably fast. I'm literally holding up a measurement microphone, swirling it in the air in front of me for maybe all of 20 seconds or so. And you can see the line that it creates smoothing out more and more as you do it. And it's just averaging the results. And I think this is something that some of the other kind of off-the-shelf EQ correction companies have been trying to do, finding a way to average response. But I think you've targeted it right at the listening position, where I think some of the other systems that are out there are averaging response from so many places in your room, some of which may be irrelevant to how things sound in your listening position. But this moving microphone average is just basically getting a whole swirl of how it sounds on average in the listening position, whether I move forward, back, side to side. And yeah, remarkably fast once you've learned how to do it.
Yeah. And so there's, we would get, and this still comes up whenever we're evangelizing this method of, oh, why don't you just use a dummy head in the listening position with the 2 fixed mics where the head goes. Again, you can move that mic, you can move that dummy head an inch either way. Human beings don't stay in one place. And I've been in studios even with people who have lasers pointed at their ears and a mirror so they can see that I'm in the listening position, and they're still moving around.
Of course.
So what this represents is something that's a lot more psychoacoustically valid than a method where we're going to try to get laser precise. We're going to try to ignore some of the smearing that takes place from a moving microphone, from all these different microphone positions that are in 3 dimensions. That's not the way we perceive sound. So what we're capturing is highly representative of what you as the listener actually hear in the listening.
Yeah, we perceive sound over time moving through space. There's no point in our lives in which we're not moving through time and space. Even if you try to sit as still as you can, I mean, with your rib cage moving up and down while you're breathing, there's going to be subtle movements. But just looking in at the screen, leaning back, I mean, that is how we experience things. So the idea of it being more psychoacoustically valid, more valid to how it translates to the actual human experience, to how it compared to it translating to how a robot sitting in that seat would experience it. And fortunately, we don't yet have robots in the chair mixing for us yet. So yeah, psychoacoustic's so important. I want to say that my experience doing this, it wasn't really any more difficult than some of the off-the-shelf, super user-friendly ones that become popular in recent years. Most of those, I think, will take people 30 to 90 minutes realistically the first time they do them. They advertise it's more like 30, And depending on user error and having to do it again, often the first time you do it, it ends up more like 90. And I think your process was similar in the respect that the first time I did this, it probably took me more than an hour, but that was me figuring out how to plug things properly into my interface and how to use this new piece of software and where all the buttons were. But now that I've done it once, I went back and redid the same process. It took me an hour and it took me about 15 minutes. So yeah. It's not daunting at all. Once you've done it, there is this tiny learning curve, but I think that's present with all of the systems, with the exception of one. The only system I can say has a 0-minute learning curve is Trinov, because they take that concept of having multiple microphones, they put it into a custom-built microphone with multiple heads on it. The problem with Trinov, I think it's great, is that it's something more like a $3,000 to $7,000 solution for 2 speakers, whereas your solution is basically, if you have a measurement mic, a good one, and you have Cali Audio speakers, there's not really an additional cost to doing it because you're leveraging free software and stuff. So I think that's another
if you have
aspect here.
If you have the Santa Monica speakers, yes.
Yes. I would hope that eventually you'll bring this technology to maybe future iterations of something like an LP or IN series, if there's ever an LP V3 or something, and there's a slight additional cost to it, or some other mid-market speaker. I'd be really curious to see this come to more intermediate and lower priced Cali audio speakers in the future, because I really do think there's tremendous benefits as well to having your speaker correction inside the speaker. And that's another feature of what you've done with your speaker correction. A lot of these off-the-shelf solutions, they're relying on a DAW plugin or a system-wide app. And some of these things are prone to crashes. I had a friend who tried one of the prominent softwares out there for headphone correction and monitor correction, and he said it caught a bug one time when he was mixing and it blasted out his ears with like extreme high SPLs. And he's like, he never turned it on ever again after that had happened. And I feel like that's much less likely to happen when you're just leveraging the EQ that's already built into a speaker, which is what's happening for you. All of your Cali audio monitors have DSP in them to flatten out the EQ curve. And this is just basically taking that same EQ that's in there and now rejiggering it so it not only corrects the speaker, but corrects your room. Is that a good way of thinking about it?
Yeah. So all the correction takes place on the DSP chip that's already processing the tuning for the speaker, the limiter, the crossover network. So it adds no latency to the system above what the DSP is already doing. So total system latency is under 3 milliseconds, which means you can be running the correction and tracking at the same time, and you're still fine. It also means, to your point, we don't have to run additional software. We don't have to worry about the computer's resources. We don't have to worry about bugs. We don't have to worry about whether or not it's on, which is a big factor in some of the ones that are DAW plugin based. If you're playing reference tracks off of Apple Music or Spotify or whatever it is, and you're not processing the EQ, then your reference tracks aren't actually reference tracks.
100%. Also, even just switching between speakers, if you have headphones and speakers and you check on both, or you have 2 pairs of speakers, you have to make sure you turn off the EQ correction when you change to your headphones or change your alternate set of speakers, and all that goes away when it is built into the speaker like you have.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, I brought up a screen here. We can talk more about the theory of this, and we can take questions from the audience as well. Thank you guys for joining us. Roel, Toshi, let me see if I can say it correctly. Toshihiko, Glenn, Ari, great to have you here. We'll be taking your questions if you have questions or you want to share your own experiences with EQing. I'll be reading those aloud, so feel free to type them in. But I went through this process myself just to see how daunting or not daunting it may have been. I've used basically all of the other major systems. I've used the SonarWorks and the IK Multimedia. I've used the Trinov and tried them all. So I do have a basis of comparison to how this process functions compared to the averages there. And I've got to say, because of the moving microphone method, it was no more difficult or no more time consuming than the most user-friendly, inexpensive software packages out there. A lot of the other packages involve taking a microphone and placing it in many different places. For your system, I really only had to place the microphone in one place and then make sure I was playing a signal off each speaker separately. And then I had to do another set of measurements, one for each speaker, where I removed the microphone from the stand and I just moved it around in a figure-8 pattern. So there was actually, in a way, less for me to do physically than with a lot of the off-the-shelf software solutions. Like I said, the only other one I can compare it to that I think gave results that were as good and even quicker was Trinov, but we're talking about something that is going to require $3,000, $5,000 of hardware or more for a 2-channel system. Yours, as long as people are getting the Santa Monica series, it scales up. It's not going to cost them really any more to do a multi-channel surround sound system if they're doing it all by themselves. So they don't have to get some crazy hardware to do, 10 channels, 12 channels. They can basically buy the speakers once and then go through this process for each speaker. In that case, you just have to do the moving microphone technique, 10 times, 11 times, 12 times. So instead of it taking, 15 minutes, maybe it'll take 20. But the longest part for me was just figuring out this totally free software called Room EQ Wizard. And now that I know how to use it, I know how to use it forever. And I got to say, why have I not been using Room EQ Wizard already? I just want to be an advocate now for, even if you're not going to buy Cali audio monitors and go through this process, of still going through this process of taking a moving microphone measurements of your room just to understand what's happening in your room. And one of the things I want to share with people, Nate, is when I started to go through this process, I set up your speakers not in my main listening position, but I set them up off to the side in my room. I didn't want to take down my big speakers and go through a whole rigmarole. So I'm like, I'm just going to put them here. If I were to change my desk orientation in this room 90 degrees, where would I put these speakers? And it's not ideal because I have a kind of dead end in front of me and a kind of live end behind me, but I just want to see what it would be like. And the initial measurements I took, I was surprised at how big of a null I had here at 80 hertz, even with all of the acoustic treatment in this room. This room is exceptionally well tuned in my listening position. It's really flat. I have a ton of bass trapping and low frequency absorption going on in the room. But when I moved the speakers to a new place in the room, all of that went to pot and it was terrible. And as soon as we looked at this measurement, I said to myself, this isn't right. How can I get away with having an 80, 90 hertz huge null like this? This is going to be impossible to mix on. It's going to be impossible to EQ this out. And then I got into the idea of, okay, now let me move these speakers around while listening to music. I started playing music through them and just put them somewhere in the room where I thought sounded good. And all of a sudden, just by doing that, placing them properly and taking the measurement again, we can see that null went completely away. So if we look at my old left, here's my old left with this huge dip from 60 to 80 hertz. Just from moving the speaker in the room, I was able to go from this to this. This purple line is the new response. And it completely got rid of this huge null that would have been impossible to work on just from listening to music on the speakers and putting them in a good spot. We can see the same thing on my right speaker. Here is the original measurement I took, just haphazardly placing them in the room somewhere that looked ergonomic. Huge null here at 90 hertz. And then as soon as I just listen to music through them and move them to a good spot, you can see that null at 90 hertz absolutely disappears. And now it can be corrected by EQ correction. So here are the let's see, those are the old curves. Here are the new curves. And then once we apply some EQ correction in the speakers, they should flatten out to look like these new curves. And this would be the new kind of in-room response where we flattened out, say, everything above 100 hertz. For this in particular, I've chosen to not do correction below 100 hertz because I think that if I was going to place speakers in this room in this lateral way, I would need to rejigger my bass trapping situation, my acoustic treatment situation, to try to get rid of this cut a little bit more before I were to go to an EQ solution to smoothing that out even more. But it is a far cry from where this started out, which is with these absurdly deep nulls, and it would have been impossible to mix in that environment. But just going through the process of seeing how things charted and then applying EQ to them, we get so much closer to something that can be done reasonably. And I would say I'd budget an hour for it to get there. And now I feel like I could move these speakers again in the room and it might take me 15 minutes. Or if I put up new acoustic treatment and I just want to do another measurement again, I feel like I could do it in 10 or 15 minutes. So I would encourage people to download Room EQ Wizard for free. Get yourself a measurement microphone. There's a particular one that you guys recommend from Earthworks, who are right here in New Hampshire, nearby me. And have that stuff at your disposal because you can learn so much from kind of taking it into your own hands, just learning how to take a moving measurement analysis of your room from your listening position, and then start making critical decisions first about where you're going to put your speakers in the room, because that is so big. And it can do so much of the work that you'd want EQ correction to do. Two, it can help you make decisions about where and how to place acoustic treatment. And then third, you can feed this into a set of speakers like the Callies, and all of a sudden take some of the significant deviations from flat and make sure that you have not just speakers that are flat, but speakers that present in the room as flat, which is honestly the bigger challenge. Does any of this resonate with you? Does this seem to be similar to results you've had with others, or have you gotten different feedback about this?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, you basically just gave my whole sales pitch for me for this method.
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, you're great. You want a job at Cali? The method that we have published is valid for any speaker in any room. Right. It does not need to be Cali speakers. If you have the calibration microphone, and if you've learned to use Room EQ Wizard, you can do this on any system at all. And it's not just to apply correction. Knowing where there are issues in your room, like you said, you just move the speakers. And I think earlier you had said you move the speakers 8 inches, and you got a tremendously better result. That is free. That takes no money whatsoever. If you think about the amounts of time and money that people invest into getting speakers that are flat out of the box, plus room treatment, plus acoustical consulting, there is so much money that you can spend before you just go in and say, hey, these don't sound right, let me move them a little bit. And having the ability to take the measurement and correlate what you're hearing to a scientific measurement and say, the bass sounds a little anemic. Well, there you go. You have a measurement saying the bass is a little anemic. That is so powerful for you to be able to take next steps. Do you want to move the speakers in the room? Do you need bass traps? If you do need bass traps, do you need them tuned to a specific frequency? Without knowing that, you're just throwing money at a problem and hoping it's going to get better.
Yeah. And I will say one of the interesting things that I found here about the 8 inches that you mentioned is, moving the speakers, I tried moving them, honestly, more than a foot, front and back, and it really didn't properly change the situation. But what I actually ended up doing was moving them about 8 inches lower, and changing the orientation, horizontal versus vertical. And that is what moved them out of this crazy node. And it's interesting because it's a node I didn't even know existed in the room, because that node isn't here in my space, but it is over there.
Right.
So whenever you move either listening position or speakers within your space, everything about the EQ of the room is going to change. So just also giving the idea of giving you reinforcement of, like you said, being able to have visual feedback of what you're hearing. Because I said to myself when it was in this bad spot, the low end sounds, it's okay, but I feel like there's this excessive sub and like upper mid range, but like there's like a hole somewhere. Where is it? And just being able to see there, it's a deep null at 80 to 90, just taught me so much about how that feels in the space. And then once I moved it and I heard much more even bass response, and just being able to confirm that for myself visually, okay, that was a good move. I put them into a better place. And I got to tell you now, Nate, I can't imagine buying a new set of speakers or setting up speakers in a new room and not having a microphone with me after having gone through this process. Like, I want to get them into a good spot by ear, measure it, and see, are there any huge nulls? Okay, let me try to get another spot that sounds good to me by ear, measure it again and say, okay, this one's even flatter, let's go for that. Or no, I moved in the wrong direction. Or sometimes you feel like you're chasing your own tail. You say, I moved it and I don't feel like I heard a change. I can't even tell if it's better. Maybe it's better. And you measure it and you find that it's not any better, because even though you moved it a foot or two, you didn't move it out of the motor node, because the motor node you're in isn't a front to back mode. It's an up and down mode, or it's not an up and down mode. It's a side to side mode. And you could make movements assuming you're making a difference and make no difference at all, because you're not moving the speakers out of the plane in which there's a mode. Because there's 3 different directions we could have a mode or a node. I could have a mode or a node that I can get out of by moving the speakers or my listening position forward or backwards. Or there could be a mode or a node that it doesn't matter if I move it front or backwards, because it's about up and down, the distance between the ceilings and the floor. Or it doesn't matter either of those things, because the mode I'm in is in this position. Maybe I'm asymmetrical in the room, and just bringing it to a symmetrical spot in the room makes it go away. Or it could be, in some rare cases, the other way around. You might be in the center of the room, and you could be in a deep null. But if you actually went off center a little bit, even though that's not ideal, it might get rid of a mode and it might be a compromise that's worth working with.
Yeah.
So really interesting stuff that you can discover. And it kind of got fun after a while of moving this mic, hearing music, hearing the noise, seeing what it looked like on the chart. And I feel like it's a great ear training exercise. And I do love that this technique that you show people, if they were to go to your website, go through the Santa Monica series technique, they would end up with an EQ file that they could use on any EQ on any set of speakers, even if they didn't buy Cali audio speakers. Or if you had the
Absolutely.
Cali LP series, you could still go through this process, get yourself an EQ file that you could then create a custom EQ that you could either load into, say, an interface or into your DAW. So it's a fun process. Go get a measurement microphone and try this stuff. But what's your recommendation for measurement microphones? I know you have one you recommend for the Santa Monica series in particular. That's a very high-end one. But if someone was going to do this with a set of speakers at a lower price point, would you recommend something different if they were just curious about starting to measure the room? Any thoughts about selecting measurement microphones?
Yeah. If somebody was mic curious. So right now we only support the Earthworks M23R, and the reason for that is that we need to build a special file for the way that we're capturing that moving microphone, which is called a random incidence calibration, which basically means the microphone doesn't care where the sound source is. It's capturing total sound power without any sort of bias in one direction or another. That's a bit of a process to get there, which is why we only support one microphone for that right now. We are working on it. But the M23R really is a fantastic mic. We're also, we have a DPA mic in our possession right now that we're working on doing the exact same thing with, so we can support that microphone as well. Hopefully, eventually, we can help to support some lower tier microphones. But right now, it's those sort of $500 to $600 measurement mics that we support.
Yeah. Well, theoretically, any company that makes measurement microphones for pro audio purposes who want to support people who are using something like Room EQ Wizard, any of those companies could generate their own calibration file for Room EQ Wizard, and they probably should start to do that. It shouldn't be on the speaker company to make the calibration file for the microphone company. This is a little tiny thing just so people understand a part of the process that we haven't covered. And for people who want more details, let me know in the chat if you want me to give you all the details of what this process is like right now, or if you want to instead have us direct you right to Nate's stuff and we can go deeper on other ideas. But part of the process is we calibrate our DAW with Room EQ Wizard. So we actually take an output of our interface, plug it into the input of our microphone, and we hit a calibration button that allows us to get the frequency response of our interface to make sure that's not throwing things off. Now, that's probably a very minor thing, but when it comes to microphones, same thing. Even though it's a really flat measurement microphone, there could be some deviation. And ideally, you'd have microphones that are tested, and then you can have a calibration file that says, okay, if this microphone is going to deviate, it's by the tiniest bit right around here, and then you could load that calibration file into Room EQ Wizard to take that out of the equation. Now, with that said, this is not the most scientific best way to do things, Nate, but I feel that you could take those two things out of the equation, not do the interface calibration, not do the measurement microphone calibration, and still have great results that would lead you in the right direction relative to not doing EQ at all. Because the differences from microphone to microphone when it comes to measurement microphones are so small. And the differences in EQ when it comes to your average pro audio interface today, even a cheap one, are so small that you could skip this calibration process, use any old microphone, use any old DAW without calibrating for your interface, and still get great results. That said, you guys are really particular. When people are buying the SM series, we know that they're buying a high-end Cali monitor, not your cheaper ones, and you want them to do everything right. So you're holding them to a high standard of, let's use a perfectly calibrated microphone that we have the calibration file for, and let's calibrate our interface. But for someone using, who has a $300, $500, $600 set of speakers, they want to buy the cheapest measurement microphone they can find, they want to skip the steps of getting a calibration file for their microphone and calibrating their interface, you can skip those steps and end up in a much better place than if you did nothing at all. So any thoughts on that, Nate?
For sure. I would just take it all with a grain of salt. If you don't have the calibration really, really dialed in, I'm going to make some broad brush statements, which will not always hold true. But for the most part, any decent measurement mic, talking about the $100 or so that comes with a calibration file. So if you look at like the SonarWorks mic as an example, those have individual calibration files per microphone to account for any deviations they have from flat. Between roughly the bottom of the frequency response and 700 hertz, that is where the majority of problems with the room are going to occur. And the problems are big problems. The problems aren't these subtle little like 2 or 3 dB things. The problems are huge bumps and dips that are happening because of room modes. You can at least see where those are. Do you want to apply correction based on that? I don't know. But will that tell you, hey, you have a massive dip at 80 hertz, and look, you have another massive dip at 160 hertz. That's a resonance of 80 hertz. I wonder if those two things are related. That can tell you, okay, I got to move my speakers, or I need an 80 hertz bass trap. You're not going to go too far in the wrong direction with any of that. And certainly if your goal is to take the process of listen, place the speaker somewhere else, listen again, listen to a bunch of different orientations, and then decide the one that sounds best, you will have some data to correlate that to your listening experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And you could even create an algorithm using Room EQ Wizard. You could tell it if you... I'm just my worst case scenario here. You have a non-properly calibrated mic and you calibrate your interface. You could say to Room EQ Wizard, okay, if the EQ change is less than a dB or something, it's within the tolerance of the microphone, just don't change it. We'll just assume anything that's within a dB doesn't need to be altered further. And if it's bigger than the 12 dB, we won't change it because it's just too much EQ. But anything in that sweet spot of 2 dB to 10 dB, those are the things maybe that want to be adjusted. And doing that kind of broad strokes thing would solve most of the major problems for most people. Now, that said, if you're in a super high-end room, you got super high-end Santa Monica speakers, get the calibrated measurement microphone, and then, take the extra minute and a half to calibrate your interface. But not hard stuff. And I just want to give people that comfort of, even in a broad strokes way, this stuff can be extremely useful. You don't have to be perfect for it to be helpful. But that said, it's not hard to be perfect. So if you have a little bit of time and a little bit of resources, do it. All right. The last thing I want to show people here, Nate, and then we'll switch to taking audience questions, is just what it looks like how you've integrated the process of, okay, I took some measurements, really easy to do. I literally pressed play on white noise like 2 times and moved a microphone around. That gave me my calibration. And then I pressed play on sine wave sweeps twice with my mic on a stand. It did the calibration, and I was pretty much done. After that, people who own Santa Monica speakers will be able to send you the basically the EQ file, let's call it, from Room EQ Wizard. They could send it to you guys and have you guys do some additional tweaking, double checking of it. And I think you're doing that as a free service right now to Santa Monica speaker owners. Is that right?
Yeah, as of right now, which is late 2025, we're doing that for free. At some point, we're going to start charging for that, which will be $50 per speaker. And what you get for that, we outline the whole process. Everything we do is documented. You can see exactly what we're doing. If you want to do it yourself, you're free to do so. But
I did it myself. It was not hard.
Yeah, it's not terribly difficult. We've done a lot of these, and we can tell you right away based on your measurement, like I told you, based on that first measurement you took, your speakers are in a terrible place in the room. Move them.
Yeah, right.
That's exactly what we would tell a client.
This measurement,
Yeah. And then we can also go through, we've seen a lot of these. So this is kind of old hat for our team. Dial in the sound, send you a complete file for our software to load these into your Santa Monica speakers, and then have you listen, have you confirm the measurements. And if you don't like it and you want to make tweaks, then we're involved in that process with you and we can help out with that.
Yeah. And I believe I was able to do this additional step that people send files to you to do. It took me an extra 5 minutes here on my end to do it, but I basically spit out a finished EQ file. And then I loaded up here into the free control panel application that came. And actually, your control panel app gives me the ability to apply additional EQ to it. I can change these if I wanted to, or if I wanted to not adjust the low end or not do anything by this high end, I could turn on or off these EQs. And then basically I put a USB key into my computer, take that USB key out, and then put it into my speaker and it loads. Either that or I can connect my speaker to my computer via Ethernet and it will find it here for me. and then I can do it that way. So I found that process to be pretty straightforward. Oh, I realized that as I'm saying that, I'm not showing you guys the right screen. I will show you the actual screen for those of you guys who are here. Where is that? Give me one sec. It is called Kali Audio. Here. This is what it looks like. And this is the EQ where I can go ahead and I can actually further tweak it, or I was trying to add another EQ slot there, or eliminate EQ slots. Here, I can just put in a big additional cut here. So I can edit the EQ if I want to, and then I can export it from here or import it. So that was a pretty easy process. You've made it seamless. And I think that this control panel is especially helpful for people who are using like an Atmos system, because it can go out speaker by speaker. It'll remind you which speaker to do next and which speaker this is the EQ curve for. So I think it makes that process really simple, brainless, and easy. Nate, I think it might make sense now to take some questions from the audience. Let me see what folks have been writing in. And then if you have anything you want to add to this, please do. All right. Roel writes in to say hi from UAE, which I believe is United Arab Emirates. Toshihiko says, joining from New York City, originally from Japan. Glenn Gaither is here. He said that masterclass with Nico Bolas was epic. Yeah, a lot of big fans of that one. Thanks again for helping that one come together. Let's see. Ari here is talking about setting up his subs and how long it took him to set things up. And let's see. After writes in, oh, wow, this is amazing. I've just been on the verge of buying Kali Audio IN8s. I had no clue about this. Room EQ Wizard is king. Yeah, with the Kali IN8s, they do have digital EQ in them, but they don't have the same access to them like they do in the Santa Monica series. I would love to see Kali Audio, you guys put this kind of feature into some of your less expensive monitors in the future. But for right now, you could go through this process with your IN8s, measure them, and then spit out an EQ file from Room EQ Wizard. And then you could use that into some other EQ solution, whether that is a monitoring EQ you put on in your own DAW, you could recreate that in your DAW, or whether you want to do it maybe with an interface-based EQ. Ari,
Yeah, I don't know.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know about two-channel. In terms of immersive, we've been using the Apogee Symphony a lot, which works great. Load the EQs right into there. We've also been using Audience Aurea a lot, which is fantastic. So there's solutions on the market, and the solutions are getting less expensive while still being very high quality. So again, two-channel, that's not usually the world where we're doing this. We're usually doing this in Atmos systems or other immersive formats, but there is stuff out there.
Yeah, wonderful. So you don't need it located in the speaker like with the SM series. You can do it on the interface. Toshihiko says, I use LCDX headphones for monitoring, so this might not apply to EQing speakers, but I'm wondering if too much precise correction EQ would result in the bad way than broadband correction EQ or not. Okay, I think I understand. He's not a native English speaker, so let me switch that around a little bit. He's wondering if getting too precise with EQ correction could be detrimental to the sound that you're getting relative to broad-based EQ correction. Do you have any thoughts on this? Is it possible for EQ correction to be too precise to the respect where it's detrimental, and broader-based EQ correction would be better?
Yes. So I'm not an acoustician. So take this with a huge grain of salt, and I'm going to make another broad brush statement that doesn't always apply. When you're talking about interactions between the speakers and the room, which again is below about 700 hertz, modal interactions tend to be fairly high Q dips and peaks, where you do want to be very precise correcting those. You want to bring the dips up, you want to bring the peaks down. Versus timbral shifts tend to be broader band. A well-designed speaker in a good room shouldn't have a lot of need for broadband correction. And if it does, and especially above 700 hertz, we don't want to be putting in, 3 or 4 or 5 dB high Q correction in above that 700 hertz point. Maybe when
that's
we
will
want to
become
put
more notey sounding. Yeah.
Yeah. We want to put something low Q, maybe 1 or 2 dB to correct, if there's harshness in the speaker, if there's boxiness in the speaker, that's the sort of thing we might aim to correct there. Again, a well-designed speaker should already have that taken care of.
Yeah.
And if you're in a well-treated room, those should be playing nice with each other. The problem that will come up much of the time is below 700 hertz, and that's going to be interactions with the geometry of the room and the speakers where they're sitting in the room. And that's where you do want to, if you've got a big high Q peak, you just want to take that out, and you're not concerned about, oh, I should do something a little bit more broad brush there.
Right. Yeah, the EQ should be noddy in the low frequencies because the problem is noddy, in a sense.
Yeah.
You want the Q or the bandwidth, the width of the correction to match the width of the problem. And it's very unlikely that you're going to have a narrow broadband, noddy sounding problem in upper frequencies or even most mid-range frequencies. That would just be glaringly awful and obvious to everybody, and would suggest that something is broken with your speakers, because it's very unlikely that a room is going to have like a 2K noddy sounding null or peak. It's just, that's not how sound pressure levels work in the sizes we're dealing with in rooms.
And the other thing, the thing about moving microphone is it tends to eliminate some of those problems. So where you might see somebody using an FIR filter with a lot of taps to really laser precisely correct every single problem in a speaker's frequency response, if that's based on a sweep measurement at one position, well, if we move that microphone a little bit, we're going to get something completely different. If we do a moving microphone measurement, we might discover we don't have a problem at all. Once we get a little bit of smearing going on, those problems go away. So it comes down to an issue also of, are you correcting for the right problem? If you think you have a problem based on an imprecise measurement and you correct for that, of course it's going to sound bad.
This makes so much sense. Again, assuming that we are robots in a fixed position in our listening space, you could imagine that there are these weird little peaks and nulls and comb filtering issues in the mid-range, but they are not there because that's not how we experience sound. Like just now, as I'm talking to you, these little shifts in head movement are going to be relevant at frequencies in the mid-range and the high frequencies. I mean, movements of this magnitude, 3 to 6 inches make a big difference in the bass. But once we start talking about mid-range and high frequencies, just this kind of movement of my head just ever so slightly smooths out so many of those problems that you think are there that need to be corrected for. And I think this is one of the reasons that EQ correction got a bad rap back in the day, is that people would do a single point mic measurement, and then they'd have these graphic EQs with like a whole bunch of action, or maybe digital EQs with so many taps on them that did almost more to hurt the sound than to help it, trying to solve problems that weren't really there. And I like that this averaging approach makes sure that the EQ won't focus on trying to fix problems that aren't real and that human beings aren't going to experience, and that would only be experienced by our robot overlords once they take over the world of mixing. Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. All right, next one here. After says, what's the best order of attack for correcting rooms and speakers? Specifically, at which point do I think speaker placement, treatment, or EQ? This is a kind of chicken or egg situation for me. Now, it shouldn't be a chicken or egg situation. I think that there is a distinct order here. Assuming you've already selected speakers, then the first number one thing that's the most powerful, that has the single biggest impact, is where you put those speakers in the room. That is going to have the biggest impact. You can put and not just your speakers, but also your listening position. If you put your speakers and your listening position in the worst spots possible, you pick the worst possible listening position and the worst possible speaker position, the issues you can have there could be basically impossible to correct with either room treatment or EQ. So that's the most powerful thing to get right, or to at least not get horribly wrong. So that's the number one thing to do. Even before there's any acoustic treatment on the walls, what is the best sounding place to put those speakers? And you can do that by ear. That said, get the free room EQ wizard, get even a cheap measurement microphone, and reinforce those decisions. Like put it in a place where you think it sounds really good, put tape on the floor, and then measure it and say, okay, what does that look like? And then find another place where you think it might sound even better and measure that one and see which one's flatter. Or if you have a huge problem, keep on moving the speakers until that huge problem goes away. If you see a huge null at 80 hertz and you've tried moving it back and forth and it's done nothing, try moving them up and down or side to side or rotating in the room 90 degrees. That, I think, is the most powerful thing. that can create the biggest changes in the room. After you've selected a good space for not just the speakers, but also the listening position, I think number two is acoustic treatment. Because acoustic treatment, to the extent that you can afford it, is, I think, potentially more powerful than EQ. And not only, it'll also widen your sweet spot by kind of ameliorating some of these big dips. So I would start with, broadband absorption in the corners is something I often recommend. But even better than that is tuned bass trapping to your specific placement of speakers and listening position. Find out where the worst offending areas are, and then you can potentially get tuned bass trapping to help correct that. And then the third thing after that would be EQ. This is a place where Nate and I might disagree slightly. I would almost say, just because it's so much easier to the average home studio person, that getting 6-inch broadband absorption in corners can soften some of the issues below 100 hertz. And that's very easy to do. It doesn't take measurement, and you can just do it right now. And then that, coupled with getting the speakers and the listening position in the right place, is the easiest thing for the average person to do who's not doing a from-scratch studio build and not hiring an acoustician to make them tuned absorbers. Then after that, I would say, if I was doing this in an iterative way as a home studio guy, I would then say, let me add on EQ to that. And then after that, I would say, okay, now that I have gotten things as good as I can with broadband absorption, which goes below 100 hertz, with EQ and with placement, it's still not good enough. Now I'm going to get help and get tuned absorbers in the lows. Now, Nate might have a slightly different answer because I've talked about it as Nate before. Nate's recommendation is you go for the tuned absorbers first because you're not going to overtreat your room. And that would be the answer I would give people if they were building a studio from scratch for professional usage, or you had a budget and you were working with someone to help build the studio. Then I would say to you, the first thing is the placement in this, well, the design of the space is the first thing. Designing a space that's not going to have huge issues. Then placing things in the space properly, which goes hand in hand with that. And then the the tuned bass trapping as part of that design. And then you go with everything else. But I think that advice changes depending on whether you are a home studio guy who's doing things in an iterative way on a lower budget, or whether you're building a studio purpose-made for music and you've put into your budget having acoustic help. So this is where it branches off for me. The average home user, go for the broadband absorption that goes deep enough, which means 6 inches of acoustic treatment in corners. That would be probably my first step in controlling bass after placement. But if you are purpose building the place ground up for real professional usage and you have a budget for acoustic treatment and design, then it's design of the space, placement in the room, and tuned absorption, and then the other stuff. I would still put EQ last in this situation, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It's also very powerful. I would again change this ever so slightly, and I would give a third piece of advice to someone who is traveling around. Then the most powerful things you have access to are placing the speakers and EQ, because I'm assuming you're not traveling with acoustic panels, but you might be traveling with a pair of speakers. You can place them and you can EQ them. And in those situations where you really can't do much in the way of acoustic treatment, your hands are tied, then it comes to placement and EQ. That's my theory on it, but Nate may have slightly different opinions on this. And Nate, anything you would change or correct or add to there?
Yeah. I disagree completely.
Perfect.
No, I will. I'm a broken record about this. Do everything that is free first. So getting the speakers in the right place in the room costs no money. And I have this experience of taking people into a room and having them do this with me watching. Put the speakers here. Do you like how it sounds? I don't know. There's this and this and this coming up for me. Okay, put the speakers here. Do you like how that sounds? It's a little better, but there's this and this and this. Put the speakers here. Do you like how that sounds? Oh yeah, that's great. Every single person identified the right listening position. And I have measurements that correlate what those listening positions were doing with what people's preferences were. And these are not studio professionals. They are musicians. These are people who use their ears professionally. But these are not even necessarily people who know what to look for or what to listen for when they're listening to speakers in a room for the first time. They all chose the right space, which is to say, and I think this was the point that Nico was making, just trust yourself. If you're
Yeah.
doing this for a living or as a hobby, you already have good ears. Just trust that. Um, Play around with where the speakers are in the space. Do not be married to an idea of the speakers have to be here, listening position has to be here. Take a full day and play around with it. And again, that is free.
That is the
Then
hardest
next
part in
step,
music production and room design, is not getting married to our preconceived notions about what should work.
yeah, absolutely. Past that, there are some best practices that I have never seen not work. So something that will diffuse the sound at the point of first reflections. So when you're hearing speakers in a room, you are not only hearing the direct sound from the speakers, you are also hearing reflections off of every single surface in the room. And the major thing that you're going to be hearing is that first reflection. So when the sound from the speaker hits the sidewall and bounces back to your ears. And so if you imagine if you had a mirror on your side walls and that was showing you the speaker, that's your point of first reflection. Putting something to handle diffusion up there is really powerful, and that can be a purpose-built diffuser. Those are for sale everywhere, or like a plant or a bookshelf or a curtain. You don't have to go out and spend a ton of money on this in order to at least help. Putting something soft behind you, like a couch, is always a good idea. Putting something absorptive behind the speakers is always a good idea. And that's something where you can start to maybe get some purpose-built acoustic treatment. Beyond that last sentence that I just said, all of that is free, right? You probably already own a couch. If you are setting up a studio to be a cozy, comfy space where people are going to come and listen to the mixes that you're working on of their music, you should probably have a couch behind you. That also happens to be a really good acoustic thing. You should probably have bookshelves or curtains or something in your room so you don't just have bare walls and it looks sad and lonely. That also happens to be a valid acoustic thing to do. So far, you haven't spent any money trying to address issues of how the speakers are integrating into the room. The next step, I would say, is measurement. And the analogy I like to use is if you're not feeling well and you go to the doctor, they don't just hand you a bunch of medicine and send you out the door. At least they shouldn't. They take some tests, they figure out what's wrong with you, and they give you medicine to address that specific problem. It's the exact same thing with acoustic treatment. If we don't know what the problem is, we can't address it correctly. And I will say this, and this is the hyperbolic hill that I will die on, the worst rooms I've been in, the worst sounding rooms where translation is not possible, where it's not fun to listen to music, it's not fun to work in there, have been the most treated rooms I've been in. So it's a lot of, I've done everything right. I put up all these absorbers. I put up all these bass traps. It's not sounding right because you have corrected so much that you've just sucked the soul and the life and the character out of the room. So before you do that and spend a bunch of money making things worse, at least take a measurement. And the microphone that we recommend is a $600 microphone. That is a lot cheaper than buying acoustic treatment that you're not ever going to use well.
Right.
So take the measurement at that point. Once you have the measurement and you know what you're correcting for, if you do need to make broadband corrections that are easily done with acoustic treatment, by all means do that. If you've got some sort of gentle little nodes from the geometry of your room, you can do that in EQ. It comes down to an issue of priority. It comes down to an issue of budget. It comes down to an issue of expertise. If you don't have huge problems and you just want to sort of smooth out your low end, absolutely just do that in an EQ. If you do have huge, massive, 9 or 12 or more dB problems, and they're these big high Q resonances that are super obvious, yeah, you need a bass trap. You need a tuned bass trap, and that will help a lot.
Yeah. I'm going to see if I can add a tiny bit of clarity to the idea of overtreating rooms, because it's definitely possible. And I've definitely been in rooms that are dramatically overtreated. They've put in, but it's tricky because the rooms I've been in that are terrible, I know exactly the rooms you're talking about. They're overtreated. There's tons of absorption. But the problem with those rooms is that they're overtreated in certain areas and not in others. So they become even more unbalanced than where they started. So the classic example of this is if you walk into a room that just has egg crate foam covering all of the walls, they've dampened everything from 1K up, but they've dampened nothing below it. So it seems like it's really treated. It's just only really treated in one aspect of the frequency spectrum. And then the rest of it is where they have even bigger problems is now more amplified and more resonant relative to everything else. And you can also run into a less bad but still significant problem that's similar by using 2-inch or 4-inch rigid fiberglass insulation is what's generally recommended here. But if you get nothing but 2-inch or 4-inch panels and you put them on every single wall, maybe you're treating everything down to around 300 hertz. But then you have this weird boxy, like amplified 200 hertz down, and the whole room sounds boxy and muffled and weird, and translation is awful. And this is one of the reasons I make that recommendation of like, if you are going to treat your room, I would do it in the exact reverse order. So what most people think when they're just throwing up panels on the walls, I'll get the cheapest panels I can, put up a whole bunch of thin foam or 2-inch panels everywhere, and they dampen some of the high frequencies, but all of the areas that have the biggest problems, the lower mids and the bass frequencies, are completely uncontrolled. So I actually recommend to people the inverse of this, where you would get 6-inch thick panels and put them in the corners. Because now what that's going to control is basically everything from 20K down to about 100 hertz. And you might still have issues in the subs that you can't touch with these panels, but you haven't overdeadened your room. When you just start with imagine you're in a cuboid room, if you just start by putting 6-inch panels in each corner, and then to that add a little bit of absorption to your main spots where you're going to have first reflections and second reflections, and you can hit those with maybe something thinner, that will tend to give you a room that doesn't sound like one of these muffled, deadened, over-treated, like boomy, weird, resonant rooms. It's a more balanced way of attacking the problem, because these over-treated rooms you're talking about, which I've definitely experienced, they're not just over-treated. They're over-treated in some areas and under-treated in others, which makes for an even more unbalanced room than you started with, by, just like you said, trying to fix a problem you didn't really have. So that's where I think that the meeting in the middle is that can absolutely happen. And that happens from putting up a ton of thin panels all over a room without any thought of doing that in a balanced way across the entire frequency spectrum that helps correct the room as a whole, instead of targeting areas that probably were not your worst problem areas to begin with and thinking you've done something and you've actually just made it worse. So there's points of agreement and disagreement in there, and I think the more we talk about, the more we'll probably congeal on it. But I also loved your approach there. Always start with the free things, the cheap things, and they can do a lot, and then add more and more. All right, we're about an hour here. The last few questions that have come in, I don't think we'll address in too much detail. From Film to Code says, did they mention the Harman EQ curve during the live? Is this something useful or internet bro science? It is definitely not internet bro science, but it has nothing to do with speakers. Well, arguably it has a little bit to do with speakers. The reality is that when we hear flat speakers through our ears apply gain. Our ears are not flat. They are like amplifying devices. That's why they got all these curves in them, but they amplify different frequencies by different amounts. There's like a little bit of a boost around 3K that our ears apply to everything that comes into them. The reason things like the Fletcher-Munson curve exist is because of the shape of our ears. When we stop listening in speakers and we start listening in headphones, bypassing the architecture of our ears, we're no longer applying that same EQ curve. So the Harman curve is one possible EQ curve that's applied to headphones to make them sound more like speakers. But that is a conversation for another day, and I have episodes about this. If you want to go really deep on it, check out an episode called Why There's No Such Thing as Flat Headphones on this very channel, and you'll get a deep dive in that. Do you have something to add to that, Nate?
Yeah. I actually know a lot about this.
I'm sure. You make headphones now, because Callie makes headphones now, which you should check out.
We make headphones now, and that Harman EQ curve comes in handy.
Mm-hmm.
So something that's really nice about speaker measurement is that if you measure speakers in a room, and with a little bit of finesse to what I'm about to say, you get roughly equal energy across the entire audible frequency spectrum, those speakers will sound good to the listener. Yep. If you put headphones on a rig and you measure the same thing and you have roughly equal energy at every frequency, those headphones will not sound good to a listener.
No, they'll sound muffled. They'll sound like muffled and dark, but also tinny on the very top end at the same time. Like it's just, yeah.
Yeah, and so what the Harman curve does is try to correlate listener preference to, we can already correlate, and this is based on research that Floyd Toole and Sean Olive at Harman have done, we can correlate neutral sound to listener preference. So basically, you as a listener like to hear neutral sound. If I play you a neutral sounding speaker and a non-neutral sounding speaker, 9 out of 10 listeners, regardless of age, gender, how musically trained they are, how much production experience they have, any of these factors, 9 out of 10 listeners will choose the neutral speaker as sounding better than the non-neutral speaker. So all that Harman is trying to do with the Harman curve is correlate that same data to headphones and say, these headphones, if they align to this curve, this measurement, should sound like a good sounding pair of speakers in a good room, which sounds neutral. There is a lot of research on this. There are some other curves that are not the Harman curves that aim to do the same thing. They're pretty close to the Harman curve. And I would say, and I would be willing to entertain an argument with this. The Harman curve isn't gospel. It doesn't need to align.
It's an average that may not suit any one specific listener, but will probably suit the largest share of them.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, so when we measure headphones on a headphone jig, that headphone jig correlates to about 85% of listeners, but there's a bell curve. And so 7.5% of listeners have differently shaped heads in one way that it will sound bad. 7.5% have differently shaped heads in another way that it'll sound bad. And so there's also a lot of companies, Sony is doing this, Apple is doing this, that are working on having measurements of the distance between your ears, the shape of your ears, the shape of your pinnae, which are all these fun things that help you interpret sound, that can match a headphone's response to something that will sound good on your physical head. Most listeners fall within that bell curve, and so the Harman curve is going to sound really good to them, but there are those outliers at either side that it's not going to sound good.
Yeah, 100%. And possibly, theoretically, one of the best things you can do is, get your own unique head-related transfer function measured, and then you come up with, instead of the Harman curve, the U curve. So who is asking this? Was it from film to code? So there could be a from film to code curve that's like unique to you, that takes into account the unique shape of your ears, head, shoulders, all those things that have an impact on the way that we hear things. All right, last couple questions, and we're at an hour here, so we got to cut this off. But it's been great having you guys here. Thanks you for joining us and talking about EQ nerdily for an hour here. It's been wonderful to have you. Ari asks, the best floor? Is it carpet? No? Or would that mess up the balance of hardwood floor? It depends on what else is going on in the room, but my general preference is for hardwood floors with rugs on them. That is like a mixture of slight additional absorption and some, it's not quite diffusion from the floor, but that mix of absorption and reflection. Do you have any thoughts on what make for the best floor materials? I think it, to a degree, depends on what's happening on the walls and ceiling, but anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I've never seen a carpet not work, and similarly, I've never seen a cloud not work. Having some absorption below and above seems to almost always be a good idea.
Yeah. That's what I basically have here is carpet rug, like right under my listening position, where I want that little bit of additional absorption from the reflections off the floor. But then the corners and sides of the room are still somewhat reflective. And I feel like it somehow is a slightly more live feel. And for some reason, I don't know if it's aesthetically or just personally that I don't like the whole room to be carpeted. But for whatever reason, I like the mix of hardwood with absorption in the places where the reflections matter most. All right. And he also asked, triangular ceilings, is that beneficial maybe? I don't know. I think triangular ceilings make things worse and harder, don't they? What are your thoughts there? I've never been in a space with one.
Yeah. So
professionally.
There's a lot of pseudoscience saying that a non-symmetrical room, a non-cuboid room, so basically meaning you have all sorts of different angles in the room, should work better than a cuboid room. And that's not completely incorrect. In a cuboid room, you have very predictable problems because they're problems that occur because of parallel walls. And because those problems are predictable, they're typically easily understandable and easily correctable. In a non-cuboid room, and there's a lot of studios, a lot of control rooms that are diamond-shaped, that are asymmetrical front to back. So maybe they're a little narrower in the back and maybe a little more open in the front, or the other way around. You still have all those same problems. You still have room modes. You've gone from a three-dimensional problem that's easily modeled and easily predicted to a many more dimensional problem that can be a lot harder.
Is it almost like there's more modes and nodes, but they're smaller?
They're not necessarily smaller, but there are more of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you don't design that room well, you're gonna come into issues. The best sounding room on the planet shouldn't sound good at all. It is a shoebox in all the wrong dimensions. It's the Musikverein. It's the main concert hall in Vienna, Austria.
Hmm.
And it was designed in the 1800s. Everything about it should not work acoustically, and it sounds incredible. Every seat in that house sounds incredible.
Hmm.
And to keep it in that sort of classical realm, there was a concert hall that was recently designed in Germany that everything was modeled down to the texture of the paint that would be used, and everything
Right.
was acoustically perfect. And it sounds like trash. Everybody hated it. And so you don't really know what you're getting into until you start building things. I would say I would not invest a terrible amount of time and money into building something non-cuboid for the
Hmm.
purpose of trying to beat room modes in that way.
Hmm.
Uh, if you have some really good design philosophy behind it, I think it can be worthwhile. But if your thought is, oh, cuboid rooms have these modal problems, so a non-cuboid room will not have these modal problems, that's not true. A non-cuboid room will have modal problems. They're just a lot harder to predict exactly what they're going to be.
Fascinating. All right. That's something I want to study more deeply. All right. Toshihiko says, thank you for answering your my question earlier. Last one for you is, should we apply EQing to our monitoring system? Okay. When we apply EQ to our monitoring system, should we use linear phase or zero latency EQ?
It depends on it depends on a lot of factors, but basically it comes down to the power of your system. Zero latency takes a lot more processing power. And is zero latency important for what you're doing? Are you tracking? Then you should use zero latency. Are you not ever tracking in this space? Then a linear phase EQ might be the better choice. But it is more context based.
Yeah. Another question here is about material. Oh, I'm sorry, I just lost my questions here. Give me 1 second to pull them back up. Film Decode says, very informative. Thank you. Also, the Mixcon videos are great. Nico Bolas was awesome and inspiring. I agree. Oh, I remember. I wanted to add something to your linear phase versus zero latency. Linear phase theoretically gets rid of phase cancellation issues with EQ, which can basically result in a slightly different EQ when spread across multiple channels than we thought we were going to get. I think some of the problem that linear EQs seek to solve may not be a problem that always needs to be solved. So, for example, if we have two channels and we're EQing them in exactly the same way, then whether or not it's phase linear doesn't make a difference. If you EQ a mono signal and it's only that one mono signal that you're EQing, doing that with a phase linear EQ should have no effect, no beneficial effect. It's only when you add another duplicate of that same channel and EQ it differently, now all of a sudden we end up with a different EQ curve than we thought we were going to get. So that's the issue there, but it potentially adds another problem, which is this problem of pre-ringing, and it takes the problem in the phase domain and moves it into the time domain. So I don't want to say that they're bad, but I almost wonder if, to me, sometimes phase linear EQs are in some circumstances trying to solve a problem that isn't really there and are sometimes introducing other issues that may be just as problematic. I just don't know if they're always... sometimes they're a solution looking for a problem. Maybe I'm too critical on phase linear EQs, and maybe there are applications in which they make a lot of sense. Is there any merit to that? Do you have any issues with the idea of pre-ringing from phase linear EQs and sometimes them not being necessary, particularly when you're EQing the same way across multiple channels?
Not being particularly necessary when you're EQing the same way across multiple channels with speakers that are phase coherent with one another.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah.
So if you have a system, like if you have an immersive system and you have speakers that are not phase coherent with each other, then you might run into some issues there. But that's a niche use case that we're talking about.
All right, and Roel says, does Rockwool fiber sound panel really help in small rooms? Rockwool, I think, is a brand name. I think it is the same thing as rigid fiberglass insulation. A rigid fiberglass that I'm used to comes from Owens Corning, 703 and 705 being most commonly recommended. And yes, they really do help, but they help at specific frequencies depending on how thick they are and how they're mounted. So the thinner the panel is, the more it just helps with high frequencies. The thicker the panel is, the more it'll help with low frequencies. With that said, even 6-inch thick fiberglass insulation, the rigid fiberglass insulation like Rockwool or like Owens Corning, will not do anything for frequencies below 100 hertz unless you either separate them from the wall or mount them in corners, and that will start to help down there. But still, it's hard to do much with Rockwool and Owens Corning below 100 hertz. The closest you can get is to have stuff that's really, really thick, mounted in corners or separated from the walls. But yeah, that speaks to what we were talking about earlier. It can help, but if you cover your entire room with 1 inch of Rockwool, as Nate said, your room will sound terrible. If you cover your entire room with 6-inch of Rockwool, well, you just spent a whole lot of money. And for the cost of covering an entire room with 6 inches of Rockwool, you probably could have hired an acoustician to use some of those resources more efficiently, and you still probably wouldn't have successfully dealt with below 100 hertz properly. You'd have to really separate them from the wall or mount them in corners to do that. And even then, it's not as good as having tuned bass traps if you really have a major mode. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Rockwool / Owens Corning. Anything you'd add there?
No. That's just right. You can make your own absorbers. And there's guides all over the internet for this, and it's not terribly expensive, and it's not something that you need to be an experienced carpenter to do. But to your point, don't just make a bunch of absorbers or buy a bunch of absorbers and put them up everywhere. Maybe start with 2 and see if you have achieved what you wanted.
Right. Phase Station says, can we discuss something about controlling the subfrequencies, e.g. use of membrane absorption or active bass absorption? Active bass absorption is a cool idea, but those tend to be very expensive and can cost a lot. But I think they're very cool technology. Any thoughts here about getting started with either membrane absorbers or active bass absorption?
Yeah. So active bass absorption is neat.
Yes.
Really, really cool. There are 2 companies that are doing very good active bass absorbers, and unfortunately, they each own a patent on the 2 best ways to do this. So if you want to do it right, you have to buy it from these companies. One of the things you can do is to have multiple subwoofers handling your low frequency channel. So it's not a 5.2 system just because you have 2 subs. It's 5.1. But those 2 subs are separated in space and still acting as a system. If you have subs against parallel walls, so if you have 1 sub on the left wall and 1 sub on the right wall, those are going to cancel that wall-to-wall mode. If you take that a step further and you have 4 subs, so you have left, right, back, and front, you can also cancel this mode, the back-to-front mode. Because what's happening there is as the negative from the one wall hits the wall, which it would normally bounce back, and that's what causes your mode, it's hitting its opposite at the sub that is mounted in the wall, not mounted in the wall, placed at the wall, and so you don't get that modal resonance back to front or side to side if you have 4 subs in the room. So it's sort of a cheap, easy cheat to do active bass trapping in your room without needing to buy an active bass trap.
Very interesting. I hadn't heard of that idea. That's great. Last question here. I think we're going to have to cut it here because we're almost an hour and 15 in now. But Tenga says, hi, Justin. Which headphone is the best when I'm not sure about my low frequency of my room or speaker? Is the MM500 the best so far? What's the second best? Well, Nate has new headphones that I definitely want to audition and try out. And any headphones that can tell us more about the low frequencies are excellent. Let me see if I can bring up a picture. All right. So Nate, these headphones, I've not tried them yet. I've got to. What are they called, and what makes the new Cali Audio headphone special?
Yeah. So this is the Cali Audio HP1. It looks a lot like a lifestyle headphone. It's got Bluetooth. It's got noise canceling. You can take calls on it and everything, but you can also plug it directly in with a 3.5 millimeter jack. It's an active headphone, and so we have a tuning in this headphone called Studio Mode that is more or less right on top of the Harman curve. Should give you nice, accurate sound in the headphones, the same thing you would get from a good pair of speakers in a good room. We also have a little button on the headphone that you can click twice, and that will turn this into some bass-heavy headphones that might sound like some things coming out of Inglewood. You can hit that button again, and that will turn those into some consumer headphones that might sound like some things coming out of Cupertino, California. So basically, this allows you to get really nice, even response, neutral response in a pair of headphones. And then when you want to hear what your mix is going to sound like on the most popular headphones that everybody's using, you have a button that you can just click, and that will give you what it's going to sound like.
Gotcha. The sound of your voice change ever so slightly. Is there a chance that you could just connected those headphones and we're hearing you through the headphones?
Oh my gosh.
Bluetooth.
No, I don't think so. I think they're off.
Okay. It's just a coincidence and my mind playing tricks on me. So to answer the question that was asked of me, I have not tried these yet. I'm excited to. Nate, you've got to send me some. You've got to try them. He was asking if the MM500 are the best so far because I've recommended these a bunch to people in the past. These cost way more than the Callies. These are about $1,800. The Callies are about $300. In the past, up until now, I mean, my favorites are the LCD 4s and LCD 5s from Odyssey. Those are about $4,000 to $5,000. These to me sound about 96% as good for $1,800. What I've recommended in the past for open back planar magnetic headphones, which is generally my preference for critical listening mixing purposes, have been the MM100s from Odyssey and the Aventone Planar 2s for $400. Those are open back. There may be ways in which open back headphones are going to outperform any dynamic headphones, including the ones that Nate makes. However, there are benefits potentially to the kinds of headphones we're looking at from Nate. One, the headphones I'm talking about for more money have zero of the features that Nate just mentioned. They're not going to do any of that imitating Beats headphones, imitating AirPods, as well as giving you good Harman curve response. They're not closed back like Nate's headphones. They don't have the Bluetooth accessibility like the Cali Audio headphones. So there's still many ways in which those might be preferable. Also, another way that I would imagine your headphones could be great is that since they are Bluetooth lifestyle headphones as well as studio headphones, if you do all of your listening on those headphones when you're out and about, and then you go into the studio and you're actually making choices on the same headphones that you listen to records on all day, that will lead you to better choices than, like, I would rather have inexpensive dynamic headphones that I know really well than these headphones, which cost 5 times more if I didn't know them. So that's another big thing as well. And then, of course, with the closed back headphones like Nate has, they also will work well for tracking and not just mixing and mastering applications. Like, you cannot record using those headphones that I just picked up there because there'll just be a ton of bleed. So those are some thoughts. And I'd love to hear your headphones so I can hear how they compare. Those have been the recommendations I've made up till now, but my headphone recommendations will regularly change as new stuff comes out. 3 years ago, I recommended totally different headphones than the ones I do now because the ones I do now weren't out yet. And new headphones come to market every year. So I reserve the right to completely change my recommendations on headphones as more and more better headphones come out. I think we're in a golden age of headphones. We've been in a golden age of speakers. And I think Cali is one of those brands that's like putting a feather in the cap of the golden age of speakers, where like the first time we have accessible to everybody, super studio quality, incredibly flat speakers, better than what I started with 20 years ago for a fraction of the price. And brands like Cali are making that happen. And I think we're entering that kind of space now for headphones as well, where sometimes you can get better results out of headphones than speakers today, just because they're taking the room out of the equation if you get good enough headphones. So I'm excited to see what you guys have done with headphones and will continue to do with them. Yeah, that's it for me. Any last final notes you want to give people here before we tell them goodbye for the day?
That's it for me. Thank you so much for hanging out.
Sweet. Thank you guys for joining. Roel, After, Ari, FaZe, Tohishiko, I hope I'm saying it correctly, Glenn, all of you guys who have joined us live. Absolutely great to have you here. Remember, we are giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear in the MixCon mega giveaway. Let me pull that up over here. Go over to mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com, where you can sign up for your chance to win. There's 3 chances to win, including some wonderful Cali Audio speakers and a Cali Audio subwoofer. So definitely check that out. Also, check out the masterclass we just did with Nico Bolas. He is a user of Cali Audio monitors. He outfitted his whole studio with them and some studios he's helped build as well. He's a big believer and lover of the brand, as am I. I really think they're making some of the best bang for the buck in studio monitors. I think their IN series of monitors from these guys are like the sweetest of sweet spots when it comes to studio monitors. They are more affordable than most pro level monitors, but better than a lot of pro monitors that cost more than them. Flatter. They've got the mid-range driver, which I think is essential for mixing purposes. At the lowest end, the inexpensive LP series, I mean, they dramatically outperform so many other inexpensive studio monitors, or even really nice studio monitors from when I was getting started. Just really flat, neutral, lead you in the direction of making great choices. And the Santa Monica series are absolutely beautiful. They take that same flat Cali curve that we are used to, and then basically improve the transient response, distortion, everything, the imaging, the spatialization, just really wonderful sounding speakers. Thanks again, Nate, for being here and joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us. It's been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop with Nate of Cali Audio. See you next time.